I'm sorry, what's that?
I said, have you made it back from Rotary in time?
Just finished.
That's finished. Good. I'm sure Helen's speech was magnificent.
You know, it was very good.
Yeah.
Gave a good perspective.
As soon as the mayor logs on, we'll go ahead and start the meeting. There's the mayor.
Hello. Sorry, I'm a minute late.
That's okay. Councilman Mitchell is with us. So we have all of our members present. Good afternoon, everybody, on this beautiful sunny February 23rd day. And the sun has come out. Hopefully will be with us for several days. I will call the order of the Public Safety Committee meeting of February 23rd at 1:30 p.m. I'm going to ask Council Member Kevin Shealy to lead us in either a moment of silence or an invocation, whatever is his preference.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let us pray. Our dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for the blessings of this day and blessings of every day that you give us. We thank you for the men and ladies who put their lives on the line for our safety. We ask that you'll continue to protect them and guide them. We ask that you'll guide us today in our meeting and allow our actions to be acceptable to you. For it's in your holy and precious name we pray.
Amen.
Amen. Thank you very much. Appreciate those nice words and
Thank you.
keep us focused. The next item on our business, the next item on our agenda is the approval of the January 26, 2021 minutes. I'll entertain a motion to adopt those minutes.
Move for approval.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Ayes have it. This is not on our agenda, but I just wanted to let y'all know that I have been in contact with Chief Courier and with Jason Kronsberg on the status of Fire Station number 11. I'll just tell you that things are moving in a positive direction, and we'll get a report from them on our next Public Safety Committee meeting. Hopefully, I think we've got some good momentum going on with that. As y'all are aware, we have had a series of meetings and discussions concerning the Charleston Police Department after action report following the events of May 30, 31st, 2020. And so within less than a year's time, we have had several drafts of this report prepared. At our last meeting, we asked Heather Malloy and her team that she's been working with to go back and do some fine tuning on some of the drafts that we have seen, the last draft that we've seen, including to get some more community input on the impact that the events of those 2 days had on our community. Heather has done that. I've been in contact with Chief Reynolds as well. You should have received a copy of the report, including a guide that I think Heather put together that sort of highlights the pages of the report, so you don't have to thumb through the entire report to get to the points I think she's going to focus on, which has updated on warrants, new damage assessment, what has happened since, community feedback, the chief's thoughts, property damages, and fire department's input as well. So that's a very quick, brief summary, I think, is what has been supplemented. Heather, I'm going to turn this over to you, and what I would propose that we do, as we have in the past, Heather goes through her report. If you have questions as she's going through it, please raise your hand and I'll recognize you. We have the chief and several members of his team available to us. Also, Chief Courier and members of his team are with us as well to answer questions and offer the input and feedback too. So Heather, with that golf ball being teed up for you, you get to take the first swing at this, okay?
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, Mayor. Good afternoon, Chairman Shayed, and members of the Public Safety Committee and other council members that are present or listening. And also, I know that this is public, so any of the public that is listening to this call. Also, good afternoon to Chief Reynolds and Chief Courier. My name is Heather Malloy. I'm an Assistant Corporation Counsel for the City of Charleston. And I've been assigned the task of leading and organizing the fact-finding process in the Charleston Police Department's after action review of the events of May 30th and May 31st. At this time, the department has developed a final report and it is available publicly on the department's website. And I believe that all the council members and the mayor have a copy at this point, along with a guide that will actually give you the page numbers where we have the update. So I have reviewed the final report and I'll be providing you with a summary of this report and the department's assessment of its response to May 30th and May 31st. And the report is titled Strengthening Charleston. I have asked some of the command staff to be present with me today to cover some of the sections of the final report. Today, here I have, of course, Chief Luther Reynolds, Captain Dustin Thompson, Captain Tony Cretella, and Captain Jason Bruder. These are three captains who were really an integral part of the operations on May 30th and May 31st, and who were also part of the team that developed both the preliminary report and the final report. Also present on the call are Chief Fire Marshal Mike Gelazida and Meg Thompson, both who assisted in providing information in the report that we will talk about today. So I wanted to give you first a brief recap of events since the presentation of the department's preliminary report. As you know, on October 8th, 2020, the department presented its preliminary report, which was a comprehensive 63-page report containing a detailed overview of events and an after-action review by the department. The report was based on guidance from the National Police Foundation, which was distributed by the Office of Community-Oriented Policing. The report contained a detailed timeline of events of May 30th and 31st with associated maps of routes of protesters and rioters and police and fire calls. The report also contained the number of officers responding from the department and partnering agencies, arrest information, numbers of calls for service, an assessment of equipment damage and injury to police, fire, and outside agency personnel, and information regarding department response to resistance and aggression. The preliminary report also outlined an analysis of 5 key areas of review as part of the after action review. Those areas were 1, command and control, 2, internal communications, 3, external communications, 4, keeping track of resources and personnel, and 5, response to civil disturbances. Part of the analysis of those areas included a review of positive practices, areas for improvement, and lessons learned. Finally, the draft report contained a section titled Moving Forward that included actions the department had taken and actions that were in progress as the result of the review. At that October 8th Public Safety Committee meeting, suggestions were made to the department to include additional information in the department's final report to give a more complete picture of the events of May 30th and 31st. Requests were made to include anecdotal information from citizens, business owners, property owners, bystanders, and other third-party observers regarding their experiences during those 2 days. Requests for additional information on damage to property and fire damage was requested as well. So following that meeting, the department began the process of gathering information and reaching out to the community to obtain that anecdotal information. On October 28th, 2020, the Public Safety Committee met again to receive public comments, and the department gave out Captain Thompson's email address to obtain further information from the community and request citizens provide the department with stories or any other information they had regarding those events. up through the end of November. The department extended that deadline to the end of December 2020 and announced the extension on several platforms to include the website and other social media in an effort to reach as many people as possible. Also during that time period, information regarding damage to property was gathered from city officials. Immediately following those events of May 30th and 31st, the city conducted a general survey of damage in an effort to obtain federal assistance for business and property owners as quickly as possible. The information did not include actual property loss estimates, as a survey was only a general overview of damages. However, the information did include a list of properties in the city that had visible exterior damage, a general description of that damage, and a series of photographs of the damage and location of those properties. Additionally, fire damage was obtained from the fire department, and that information contained more detail on fires to include whether or not a fire was determined to be intentionally set. And in that information, property and content loss estimates were obtained, and estimates of property and content savings were obtained as well. Finally, information regarding property crimes was gathered to include a breakdown of property crime. So that's all the activity that occurred since we last met. So let's take a look at the final report itself. Again, the guide, which is at the back of, it's Appendix 5 in the report, will outline the page numbers, and it'll make it easier for you all to follow, or anyone who's on the phone or watching can follow. The report is now approximately 84 pages in length, and it contains several new areas, to include an update on arrests and disposition information. The damage assessment section has been updated to include much more information. Also, the portion of the report titled "What Has Happened Since" has been updated to include events through the end of 2020. There is also a new community feedback chapter. That's where all the anecdotes from the community are contained. The report also contains a new Chief's Final Thoughts report, and you will see new appendixes, new maps that are attached as well that I'll go over. So this is the series of presentation that we'll present. First, I will go over the arrest information and the property information. Captain Bruder will update you on what has happened since. Captain Dustin Thompson will update you on community feedback. Captain Cortella will talk about some criticisms and complaints. And finally, the chief will go over the new Chief's Final Thoughts section. Okay, so let's actually get started on looking at the report. So as far as arrests are concerned, if you look at page 25, the arrests for the first day of the event, May 30th, are now at 35. The last time we reported this information, the arrests were at 32. And those arrests are based on a total of 104 warrants and charges. You'll see in the charts what those warrants and charges contain. Additionally, for May 31st, if you look on page 27, there's still a total of 52 state and municipal charges with a total of 47 defendants. The main change is the disposition of those cases. 30 of those 47 cases have been dismissed, and there's a breakdown of the remaining 17 cases. And some 8 of them have entered into pretrial diversion programs. 1 defendant pled guilty, 7 are remaining pending a jury trial, and 1 was disposed of in family court. Now let's move to the property damage section. So the property damage section is now divided into different areas. First, we will talk about property damage to buildings and other structures within the city. Then we will talk about fire damage. And we will also talk about police incident reports. And finally, we'll touch on the personnel injury for a fire and police personnel. So with regard to damage assessment, I mentioned earlier that immediately after the riots of May 30th, the next morning there was some assessment of damages. And we know that during those riots that there was an attack and destruction of business and vehicles within the city. We've covered that. Many buildings within the city have sustained significant property damage, and the damages and injuries sustained caused significant costs to both business and property owners throughout the city. The next morning, city officials began planning efforts to survey this property damage within the city. And on the morning of May 31st, tools were put in place to survey the impact and magnitude of the damage. So if you look through this first section, you'll see photographs of different areas within the city where you can see building damage. So this initial survey was done in an effort to determine whether or not federal administrative or agency declaration of disaster or other federal assistance was available. As part of the process, these general surveys of damaged business were done, and information was provided by several entities throughout the city, to include the fire marshal division. The building inspection teams were out there, business and neighborhood services division, and also the community provided some information. So these actions resulted in 136 visual surveys of building damage. The surveys of damage gave only general descriptions of the exterior of the building damage and did not include property damage estimates. The majority of buildings, and this will go, we have an appendix actually, appendix 3 of the report. This is a new map that we've attached and we've developed. And we took those 136 buildings and we divided them up by area, so you can get a really good idea when you look at the map of the peninsula of where all this damage occurred. And if you compare it to the other maps that we've put out in the preliminary report, you know, it really matches up with the route of the rioters. So in all, when you break down those 136 buildings, the majority of buildings that sustained damage were in the Upper King Street area with 82 of the 136 buildings. Next was Lower King Street with 20. Then the Market area with 10. Queen Street area 9. Meeting Street 8. And then west of King Street 7. So that's the general breakdown.
And Heather, when you talk about Upper King, just so that everybody's on the same page, are you starting at Calhoun Street?
I believe so. Maybe one of my
That's correct.
members of my team. Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Captain Bruder. Thank you. So when you look at the photographs in the report, we grouped the photographs by those areas just so you could have a visual understanding of the damage in those particular chunks that we divided the buildings in. So we looked at also, well, what types of businesses were damaged? And the types that we found were restaurants, bars, retail businesses, convenience stores, pharmacies, hotels, galleries, spirits and tobacco shops, and really a variety of other small businesses. By far, the majority of damage was observed was to buildings that contained restaurants / bars and retail stores. Then we looked at what kind of damage was reported and what was the form. And the majority of this noted exterior damage to the buildings was in the form of shattered and broken windows and doors. And that came in at about 87% of the buildings. The remaining damage noted was in the form of fire or graffiti. So after this initial survey that was done by city officials, the city officials continued to meet with business and property owners to answer questions, provide resources and information about this recovery assistance. At that time, the city also reduced the building permit fees related to business damages to only administrative costs. The city also issued a press release encouraging citizens and business owners to report damages that occurred as a result of the civil unrest. On August 19th, 2020, following city, county, and state efforts in obtaining property damage information and at a request of disaster declaration by South Carolina Governor Henry McMaster, the U.S. Small Business Administration announced that disaster assistance in the form of federal low-interest loans was available to small businesses and organizations in South Carolina affected by the civil unrest. And I believe that the application period for those loans is still open. And I know Meg's on the line too, and maybe she can tell us what that deadline is after we present. So let's now go into the fire damage portion of the report. And this really emphasizes the partnership between police and fire throughout this event and continuing on, and the very good relationship that exists. So in gathering this information, I worked with Mike Gelazada, who provided the bulk of this information and tremendous assistance. There were 22 reported fires from May 30 to May 31. And attached in appendix number 4, we have updated information. We have an updated fire map that's attached, and also an updated fire incidents list. And if you look at the fire incidents list, you'll notice that we've now given the names of the businesses. In the earlier list that we put out with the preliminary report, we had just the addresses, and there was some updated information contained in there too. So on the morning of May 31st, members of the Fire Marshal Division reported to King Street to begin processing fire scenes and initiate damage assessments. Over the next days, the Fire Marshal Division continued to conduct their follow-up investigations, survey businesses, and meet with property owners to answer questions about board-up procedures and damages. Of the 22 fire incidents reported, 20 were determined to be intentionally set. I know that was a question of the council members. 20 were determined to be intentionally set, and the cause of 2 additional fires is unknown. 13 of those fires were recorded as building fires, 1 as a vehicle fire, 6 as dumpster or outside trash fires, and 2 are classified as other. Incident records noted property damage estimates on 19 of the 22 fire incidents. So we do have some property damage estimates in this section of the report. The total estimated property damage amount for 19 fire incidents was estimated to be $2,281,769. And the total content loss was estimated to be $944,800. The greatest amount of property damage sustained to the buildings in the city was as a result of building fires at Family Dollar, Sherwin-Williams, and West Elm. So if you take a look at the report, we've put some photographs of those 3 buildings in there. Fire has reported that the response and suppression efforts by the Charleston Fire Department saved or protected an estimated $24,787,331 of property and an estimated $3,092,450 of contents. So we looked at the positive practices. Again, we talked about the 5 areas that were analyzed as part of the after action review. And when you look at external communications, there was a determination that there was a positive practice. And this positive practice had to do with the relationship between police and fire. So the amount of damage was significantly reduced by the hard work and diligence of the Charleston Fire Department. The Charleston Police Department quickly coordinated security for fire teams, allowing them to respond to the fires while the riot was going on. Having trained together to implement rescue task forces, CPD and CFD were able to communicate and establish an effective and safe plan for fire response, which likely saved lives and limited property damages. And for your information, a rescue task force provides a police escort of fire and EMS personnel in active critical incidents in an effort to reduce death and injury. The next portion of this section references property damage police incident reports. So CPD went back and they looked at all of their incident reports and looked at ones that involved property damages. In all, CPD received reports, 104 incidents reports for property damage as a result of the riots and protests of May 30th and May 31st. So there's a graph that was put together below this paragraph. You can scroll down a little, Captain. Thank you. So in all, 47 burglaries were reported, 46 of which involved forcefully entering the location. 42 incidents of vandalism were reported and included damages to businesses, vehicles, residents, a parking meter, and a monument. The damage was caused by graffiti, gunfire, rocks, bricks, chairs, wood, and a variety of other objects. 11 incidents of arson reported that involved either a burglary or a business or vandalism to a vehicle. In addition, 3 vehicles were broken into where items were stolen, and 1 ATM machine was stolen. And what's interesting to note is that 6 of those 104 incidents that I'm reporting occurred outside of the downtown area and involved incidents of graffiti or other factors that were attributed to the social unrest in the city. So there were other activities outside of the city that were found. The last portion is really a repeat of the preliminary report. There really are not any changes here. I'll just note that it's still in here. This portion of the property damage involves fire and police personnel and any costs or damage associated to equipment. Additionally, it mentions that 3 law enforcement officers from outside agencies were also injured, but ultimately there were no deaths or serious injuries throughout the event. Now I'm going to turn it over to Captain Bruder, who is going to talk to you about what has happened since.
Captain Bruder, I believe you're still on mute.
Go. Clicked it twice and maybe they didn't want me to talk today. Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. Just a quick little update. Just remember the context that we've kind of been in since May 30th and 31st. For that week following May 30th and 31st, we remained on 12-hour shifts.
Dr. Bruder, you may need to speak a little bit closer to your microphone. I think some of us have had a little problem hearing you. Sorry.
right, can you hear me better now?
Yes, much better. Thank you.
All right, sorry about that. So just to kind of reset the stage here is what's happened since in the city as far as protests and that type of thing. May 30th and 31st, obviously we're talking about those events, but for the week following until June 8th, the police department remained on 12-hour shifts, which is the level of staffing we go to for hurricane response, where everybody in the department's working. We're either day shift or night shift. It's a definite significant increase in staffing to where there are no officers having days off and that type of thing. So we remained at that level through June 8th, and we've been able to bring it back down from that since then. We did have to issue a couple of plans for major events such as the presidential election and some other things where we expected some unrest. But July 9th is when we reinstituted accepting permits again, specifically the parade permit, which is what's required to coordinate the public safety side of First Amendment assemblies and those types of rallies. So since that date, July 9th, 2020 through the end of 2020, the police department issued 89 parade permits. So a lot of those go to the weekly protests we see at the Battery and other places, but 89 events where we had to increase some level of staffing over roughly a 6-month time period to ensure the safety and allow people to continue their First Amendment rights. The reason that's significant is we've conducted those events with the things we've learned in this report in mind, and been able to conduct all those successfully and keep everybody's safety at the paramount while they exercise their First Amendment rights there. And of course, we did that all while COVID has continued to go on and be an issue for us. So with our issues and stuff going on with that. So a lot of what we've learned, we've put into place through these different events, but we've continued to have regular events, and they've continued into 2021 with regular protest events that we continue to work and continue to staff. So it wasn't like May 30th, 31st happened and we've been able to go back into a hole or something like that. So we've continued to work these events, and it's been a definite priority for the police department over the last 9 months or so. I believe Captain Thompson's next, or Heather?
Yes, thank you. Captain Thompson will now present the community feedback portion of the report.
Thank you, Heather. Good afternoon, everyone. I'll start off by saying right after the last Public Safety Committee meeting where we decided to do the community feedback, I immediately reached out to the Business and Neighborhood Services Division with Meg. And we went through a list and identified individuals in the community that we knew of, and also brainstormed with some other different areas. We ended up reaching out to City Council, our Citizens and Police Advisory Council, the Neighborhood Association presidents for those directly affected, Cannon Borough, Elliott Borough, Rag Borough, East Side Development Corporation, and as well as the over 300 central business district contacts that we have. In that list, we were lacking a little bit of some of the businesses and owners on the market, and we added to that list, which has continued to grow since that date. I won't repeat everything that Heather was saying about the extension and everything that we did to make sure that we gave enough time for community feedback. I will just add that if anyone contacted me or the department, and we did immediately follow up privately with that individual or business to ask for either a personal statement or to meet with us in person or online through Zoom or Microsoft Teams or any of those online platforms. In all, I received 28 responses from the community. A breakdown of those are 1 member of the clergy, 2 individuals associated with a college. I couldn't tell if they were students or not, but definitely associated with a local college, 7 business owners, and 18 citizens. So out of that, there was only 3 business owners that wanted to meet in person with the police department, and we conducted those at the end of December. It was 1 business owner in the market and 2 on Upper King Street that met with me. We'll tell you that a summary of the response that I got back from the community was a good balance of encouragement and support, but also to include an honest critique of our response to May 30th and 31st. You'll see in this new document that I did include 3 statements from individuals in the community. The first one is a part-time resident who was out to eat at one of the restaurants downtown. The second one was present for both, was a citizen that lives locally that was there from May 30th and 31st. And then the last one was a Central Business District restaurant owner who also lives in the city of Charleston. So those 3 are in the report now. Jason, going down to the next page. Keep going. So I added some additional quotes that were just repeated throughout some of the statements, and you can read through those. I will say that down on the bottom, I put in 5 areas that were kind of the general repeated multiple times during either the statements or my in-person meetings. And those were connected to some of the areas that we touched on already. It was 4 of the 5 areas. So it was connected back to our command control, our internal communications, our external communications, and our response to civil disturbance. Those 5 categories that were the general themes were our intelligence gathering, a lot of questions about how we gather intel now versus then, our preparation and prevention of future events, which Captain Bruder touched on, the public safety aspect for increased police presence in our area, definitely the communication with the public. We always need to improve our communication internally and externally. And then the last one was a review of our social unrest, our response to social unrest. Many of these concerns are consistent with the sentiment heard immediately after the events of May 30th, 31st, and we continue to address these topics. That's all I have, Heather.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Now, Captain Cretella will address the new section on criticisms and complaints.
Thank you, Ms. Malloy. Good afternoon, everybody. The majority of criticisms and complaints received during the public input period centered around the Charleston Police Department's response to primarily the activities on May 31st, 2020. Criticisms and complaints ranged from objections to the presence of militarized vehicles, to the level of force utilized on individuals during protest activities, and later in that particular day within the East Side community. After combining the complaints that were duplicative and multiple allegations of the same complaint, the Office of Internal Affairs had 15 cases to investigate, all in all. As part of the investigation of the complaints, we reviewed extensive hours of body-worn camera videos pertaining to the protests and riots that occurred, and also any other videos that were supplemented to us by the community, we also looked at as well. Because the amount of body-worn camera footage that had to be reviewed, the investigation did take a little bit longer than what we anticipated and expected. All in all, there was only one sustained allegation that we investigated, and the sustained allegation was that an officer failed to take a report when he or she should have taken that report. And that was a new section that was added within our investigative complaint section. Heather?
Thank you, Captain.
Thank you, Captain Cretella. Now I'm going to turn it over to Chief Reynolds to talk about the new section on Chief's final thoughts and to give his final thoughts.
Thank you. This report has been compiled from various perspectives to include those of officers, commanders, community leaders, business owners, visitors, residents, protesters, arrested criminal offenders, and others. Numerous lessons have been learned and areas of improvement were immediately addressed and utilized over the summer of 2020 to provide for many effective First Amendment demonstrations. As Captain Bruder has said, there's many things that have been ongoing since May 30th and 31st and continue. CPD and other local law enforcement partners have implemented pre-incident briefings to discuss plans and expectations for pending events, which have proven to be successful while increasing our communication amongst each other and including the community. This involves collaborating with our community regarding current policies and how to get involved with police reform and the ongoing social justice movement. Leading change was a priority prior to May of 2020 with the CNA racial bias audit and remains integral to all of CPD's efforts. Leading, identifying, and implementing substantial change remains a top priority. We are allocating a significant amount of time and resources towards being a learning organization while working diligently, actively, and consistently to address topical areas and challenges brought to light in these movements. CPD provides various ways for citizens to get involved, including our Citizens Police Advisory Council. We also participate with the Charleston County Criminal Justice Coordinating Commission Council and engage in other substantial community outreach efforts. We've expanded the activity of our Citizens Police Advisory Council. It's amazing the amount of work groups that are looking at policy and training and hiring and many other aspects of our department and our operations. We also, I just had an extensive call just yesterday with Captain Bruder, who happens to be the chair now of the Criminal Justice Coordinating Commission, and Christy Danford, who are working diligently with many challenges that exist within our local and regional systems. And I just want to give a final thanks to our council, to our mayor, to our community, to our troops, to all of our partnering agencies. There's no other way that we could have done all of this on the nights of May 30th and the 31st without help, and all the events that have stemmed since then. Without all the help and support that we've gotten and we continue to get. A big shout out to Dan Curia and Mike, who's on the phone call today, and all their troops, and the courage and the commitment that they had then and continue to have, and working closely with us to save lives and to protect our city. We are, and we take pride, and it's been mentioned, a learning organization. We are constantly auditing ourselves. This is yet another example of that process. We know that there were a lot of lessons learned from these events, and they have been and will continue to be applied as we get better into the future. And I thank everybody for their support and their active engagement in this process.
Thank you, Chief.
Thank you. That's the end of our presentation. And if anyone has any questions, please feel free to let us know.
Thank you, Heather. I'm going to call on Chief Currier if he wants to take an opportunity to make any comments or suggestions. And I know we have Mike is on available as well to address any of the fire damage. Chief Currier, anything that you want to add to this presentation and discussion?
Nothing really to add. I would echo what several have said, but most recently Chief Reynolds, and the fact that I think the close working relationship between the police department and the fire department, troops on the ground, command staff, Chief Reynolds and me personally, I think it really contributed to a good outcome, or the best outcome that we could have hoped for in the city. And I think that any specific questions about the fire operations, Chief Jalazza has been dealing with the data and has been working with Heather pretty much nonstop for the last several days. So I think he'll be able to inform us on that.
Thank you, Chief. Mike, is there anything else that you wanted to add to the Chief's comments?
I'd just like to reiterate all the partnerships that went on beyond the event, definitely with Meg's team and with livability and building inspections. They all played a very integral part in the recovery and getting information back out to the businesses so they understood how to proceed.
Thank you, sir. Well, Heather, I just want to tell you, thank you for leading the team on this. I know that you and I have spent many hours on the phone chatting about this. And as noted earlier, we've had 2 prior meetings with the Public Safety Committee on this. This is a very extensive and detailed report. And I appreciate all the collaborative efforts that you had through the Chief Reynolds and his team, and Chief Curry and his team. So I'm going to start with Councilmember Seekings, so we can start our discussion, go through all members of the committee. Councilmember Seekings, comments, thoughts, questions
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If it doesn't look like I'm looking at the camera, I'm actually looking at the report on the side screen here. Chief, I've just got really kind of one question in your closing comments today and in your comments in this report. You talk about lessons learned. What would you say is the single biggest lesson learned from this event in May, from your perspective?
I think leadership's all about relationships, working with all of our regional partners. It's hard to put it in any one single thing, but I think building trust, building those relationships, working closely together. As Dan said, it's unique, frankly. If you look at the 9/11 Commission report, the NYPD is a great example. Basically, they hate the fire department. The fire department hates them. It's gone back for many decades. And that was reflected in the response. And I think fast forward to what happened this past year, our teams train together, our commands talk to each other. We've developed what we call Rescue Task Force and some other entities where there's a high level of trust. Many fire departments will stage and they will wait until everything is safe and secure, and they refuse to enter into an area that's anything but a cold zone. And the fire department in Charleston has, since before I got here, and certainly I think we've made it even better in the last few years, and we're continuing to work on it and learn from things that occurred in May, is really interested in being a part of the solution in any and all scenarios. Active shooter, active fires in the midst of a riot, that's a very tough scenario. Not something you get a lot of repetitions in. And so it comes down to the command trusting each other and talking to each other and being physically present in our operations center. And that goes the same with our local chiefs. And I could go on and on about how important that was in our investigative side and working with the FBI, some of the ATF, some of our federal partners, working with the solicitor's office. Everybody has leaned into this and has assisted us in a lot of different ways. I'm glad Mike mentioned the damage assessment. We got a lot of help from others, Meg and others who are on this call. The whole idea of public trust and relationships applies to that with our communities as well. And not just the residential communities, but the business communities, our local constituents on so many different levels. So I think relationships are paramount. And if I could have any one singular thing, we have to continue to build that. This has been a very difficult year with our division in our country and politics and everything else. And we were in the center of that. And so how do we continue to build those relationships, build engagement, build partnerships, build trust and engagement? That's a big thing that was integral to navigating and leading through this, and is really important as we look ahead.
Thank you, Chief.
Thank you.
Anything else, Councilmember Seekins? Okay.
Yes,
I'll
sir.
shift down over to Councilmember Shealy and then Councilmember Mitchell and the mayor. So Councilmember Shealy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Not really any questions, just a big thank you to everyone for all the work that you put in here. I think strengthening Charleston is a good title of this, because I think that we will be stronger and better because of the work that you put in here. So I just wanted to say thank you.
Thank you, sir. Councilmember Mitchell.
No, sir, I want to agree with my colleague that we are still working hard in the police department, the fire department. Everyone is working in collaboration with one another, and that's what we're going to need. We have to be working together. And I think by working together as we're doing and trying to do, I think we can be able to solve any problem that comes before us insofar as public safety is concerned. And I also would like to ask someone to send me a hard copy of the report, of the final report.
We will make sure you get a hard copy of that, Councilmember Mitchell.
Thanks, too.
Yeah. Thank you. Mr. Mayor.
Sorry, I had to find my unmute. Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And a few thanks. First to Heather Malloy, who worked with this team of putting this necessary, instructive after-action report and review together. And thank you, Chief Reynolds and Courier, for your leadership. I think we owe a thanks to all of our first responders, fire and police, who were subjected to a riot. They were subjected to violence and to a riot, as were our citizens. And so we have to recognize and thank our citizens for their perseverance and resilience, but acknowledge that some of our citizens and our businesses were not just vandalized from a property point of view, but traumatized. Saying that, I feel blessed that no one was seriously injured or killed during the weekend of May 31st. So there are some blessings and the amazing cooperation between fire and police that prevented dozens of fires from not getting out of control and literally potentially could have destroyed major parts of our city. Y'all did a remarkable job. And I know often you get a report like this and you think, well, gee, we finally got it past us, we're finally moving on. But I appreciate the approach, and I feel like we need to have the approach about lessons learned and improvements and process improvements that this report and this experience, which truly was a black eye for the city of Charleston. It was a sad weekend, y'all. To take this as being instructive and putting our best foot forward to improve our protocol, to improve our communications, to improve our processes so that we continue to strive to be better in all of our public safety and services that we provide. So with those acknowledgments and reality of such a traumatic and sad weekend that we had, I thank you for the report. It's necessary, it's instructive, and we'll all continue to do better. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll note that Councilmember Jackson, who's not a member of the committee, is on, and Councilmember Jackson, welcome. I know you've been listening in. I appreciate your willingness to listen. What is the flavor of the committee? Are we ready to vote to recommend that this report be adopted and submitted to council for review and adoption?
I'll move for approval on that.
Well, is it a better word to say that we receive it as opposed to an adoption, but I'll leave that to the pleasure of the committee.
Well, and I think it's a good point, but I think that we certainly have received the report. The committee has been interactive with Heather and the team in coming back with questions and suggestions. And so this is the final product of that. And I think we can submit it to, well, maybe the better way is that we're prepared to submit this to council, full council, for their review of the report. It's ready to be handed off to the full council. Yes, sir, Councilmember Seekins.
What I would suggest is a little bit of a hybrid of what Mayor Teichelberg has suggested and what you suggested. I think that what we ought to do is report this out, Mr. Chairman, to council, that all of the questions that this committee has put forward and all the things we've asked to be done have been done. We've received this final report and we're now passing it on to City Council for their information.
Okay. Councilmember Sheila, you comfortable with that recommendation?
Yes, sir.
And Councilmember Mitchell as well?
I'm fine.
Okay. I just want to, some basic observations and my appreciation to Captain Cotella and Bruder and Thompson for their coordination and work with Heather and the rest of the team, with Chief Reynolds and Chief Courier and his team, as I mentioned before. And that is an important element of all of this, that the different departments are working together and coordinating. Those first responders, as the mayor said, were out there on the front lines of these two instances. their lives were in danger at all time. When you look at the numbers, it provides a framework to understanding in statistical figures the impact of the events of May 30 and May 31st. It can't measure, as the mayor said, the trauma that our citizens experience, and you can't measure that. You can't put a dollar figure on it. You can't explain that. The comments that I read in the report reflect some of that. That's just sort of a flavor of the personal experience that our citizens, our visitors had to go through, unfortunately, as they observed this, and they were in the middle of this. And I've talked to some of them. I've talked to business owners and property owners, and the impact is hard to measure. And is maybe not fully described in this report because it's just a difficult thing to do. But I have walked up and down King Street immediately after the riots with Chief Reynolds and members of his team. And so we did receive those impact statements from those folks. It was a scary evening. It was a scary night. When you look at the numbers from the fire department as to the number of fires and the response they had to put out those fires and the property damage, those numbers climb very quickly. It doesn't take a lot of damage to get up to the millions of dollars in damages to this. And I think that overall, two things, we are very fortunate. And I think that has been said many times over. We are very fortunate with this. And I appreciate the hard work that our police officers and firefighters exhibited that night. That's critical. And part of this report is, I think, mentioned that nobody broke the line. Nobody got, everybody followed their orders. They followed their training on how to respond to this. And if they had not, I think that different outcomes would have been experienced. And finally, I think that, as the chief said, that this is a learning document. It's an educational document. It's not something that we put on the shelves and say, this is behind us now. I think that this is something that we grow from, that we learn from, we move on with that. We use it as sort of a benchmark document. So we are always improving ourselves professionally as a city. Our goal is to protect our citizens. That's our number one responsibility, is to protect our citizens and visitors who come into this community. So, and in addition to all of this, and in my conversations with the chief about this, we've had several other things happen regarding the police department since that time. They've carried out their duties and responsibilities with the highest level of professionalism. The fire department has continued to respond to the highest level of professionalism that I think that our city and citizens should be proud of. With all this has been going on with the COVID-19 pandemic that we've experienced, we've seen other things come up that we have not cowered from. We have faced up to those things and responded to them. And I just want to show my deep appreciation for all of our first responders and what they have done in the face of a lot of adversity over the past year. So thank you all. Mayor, I saw that you had your hand up. Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If I may just add two more observations, and I thanked a lot of people a few minutes ago, and I did mean to thank also those protesters who peaceably protested. And Bruder was mentioning how since that time we've issued many more permits because we honor people's right to express themselves, and we believe in the First Amendment of our United States Constitution. And if you all recall, I don't need to remind you what led to the weekend, the terrible and racist murder of George Floyd in Minneapolis. It was a nationwide response where the scab of racism had once again been ripped off in our country. And so we stand with those peaceable protesters against racism and hatred, but all at the same time, we condemn those who resort to violence and who perpetrate violence in our city and our society. And so I didn't want to lose sight of those points as well, Mr. Chairman, and my fellow colleagues and everyone here, that that there was a real and legitimate purpose behind the gatherings that occurred in this country last year, and that continue on to some extent. And the response of the city by its prior actions of the racial bias audit of our police department, of the ongoing work of our Commission on Racial Conciliation, is all the positive kind of progress that we look to ameliorate or to address the challenge of reality of racism. But all the while, we condemn and cannot tolerate when folks resort to violence. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. All right. Any other comments, questions? Let's see, none. All right, that is all we have on our agenda for the day. I knew it would take up the full hour, maybe even hour and a half. And I know we have a full slate of other business to come before council, starting with our Ways and Means meeting beginning at 3 o'clock. So unless there's any other comments or any other business, we will go ahead and adjourn this meeting. Thank you all very much for your participation, your work on this, and your dedication to public safety. We are adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you.